All right, so good evening, everyone. Glad you could join us here. And once again, this is Greg Giardino with Atlas Fiduciary Financial. And we'll be talking tonight all about the Secure Act 2.0. It's gotten a lot of press lately. It's been passed here at the end of December of last year. And there's a lot of long-lasting implications for those that are professors and in academia. So tonight we're going to focus just on the New Jersey higher ed plan here, the New Jersey alternate benefit plan, and how some of the impending legislation may impact you moving forward. So we're not going to go through every provision tonight, of course, but we're just going to highlight some of the main points. And then we're going to also talk about some things you should be thinking about here in 2023. It's a great time to be thinking from a financial planning perspective, things you should be doing, whether it's looking at your retirement projections, getting your cash working harder, and some things to keep in mind. So we'll try to keep it here to maybe about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll leave some time for some Q&A at the end. If you have any questions about the Secure Act, we'll make sure we get to them and any other questions you may have. So with that being said, let's dive in here, and I will share my screen. Right. So quick disclosure, this video is for general purposes only. I am just a financial advisor and I'm giving you general education tonight, interpretation of the Secure Act law. If you're looking for any specific advice, whether it's tax, legal, and otherwise, please talk with your appropriate specialist and consultant. And of course, the strategies we talk about this evening, there's no guarantee of success, so keep that in mind. All right, so we know that the Secure Act 1.0 was passed back at the end of 2019. And when you look through the provisions of the Secure Act 2.0, which was recently passed, there weren't a whole lot of big game changers as there were in 1.0. There are still some very important points which we'll review tonight, but one of the big takeaways of the 1.0 legislation was for those beneficiaries that were not your spouse. So if I have a 401a, I have a 403b, or I have an IRA, and eventually I pass and I presumably give it to my spouse, and then they pass away, the money that would go to your heirs, your children specifically, well, with the passage of 1.0, they had to basically, the year after the person died, that IRA, 403b, etc., had to be emptied out at the end of the 10th year after the year of death. So this was a huge deal because prior to 1.0 passing, if you passed your IRA or your 401a, 403b to your child, well, at that point, they could stretch it out over their life expectancy. So instead of emptying it in 10 years, they could take it distributions over maybe 30, 40, 50 years based on their own life expectancy. So that was really powerful from an investment standpoint and tax deferral standpoint, because they can defer the taxes on that for 30, 40, 50 years. And it was a nice way of letting the money compound and accumulate. So here in 1.0, that was one of the major things, also known as the 10-year rule. And the other big change that came along was they pushed that required minimum distribution age, that age for your retirement accounts, where you mandatorily have to take distributions at age 70 and a half. So what 1.0 did was they pushed that back to age 72. So I have here as a date, July 1st, 1949. So if you were born prior to July 1st, 1949, you had to take your required minimum distributions out of your retirement accounts at 70 and a half. And if you were born after June 30th of 1949, well, then you had to take it the age in which you reached age 72. So with the passage of 2.0, even though 1.0 had huge implications, 2.0 also furthered these required minimum distributions. And now they're being pushed back, as we'll see, to either age 73 or 75. And that is also a big change from where we were at 70 and a half. Additionally, there's lots more of these Roth incentives. It seems like there's Roths everywhere. It's gotten a lot of press, and now there's even more options to get your money into a Roth IRA or into a Roth component in your retirement plan. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through the presentation tonight. And then there's lots of different incentives for savings. You can increase your contributions in certain places. So all in all, there's some things you should be paying attention to really maximize your wealth moving forward. So who gets to use this new required minimum distribution age of 73 and 75? So as we just said before, if you were born, and I did a little chart here to maybe help you visualize this, but if you were born before 1951, the rules don't apply to you. You're still either bound by that 70.5 number or that 72 number. And it's all focused around that date we just spoke about, which was July 1st, 1949. So if you're born before that or after that, you'd be able to tell what your required minimum distribution age would be. And for those that were born between 1951 and 1959, those are the folks that will have to take their required minimum distribution at age 73. So that's essentially those that turn 73 between 2023 and 2032. And then moving along, if you were born 1960 and later, then your required minimum distribution age is now age 75. So it's been pushed back almost 4.5 years now from where 70.5 was. So essentially there's what looks to be a little bit of a typo here, but for those turning 75 in 2023 and beyond, they now have to take it at age 75. So these are huge implications because if you think about it, the money you were supposed to take from your retirement plans, presumably being all pre-tax, never taxed on before, now what we're essentially doing is now that your age is being pushed back, now we're really accelerating and shortening the window in which you have to take those monies in a distribution, not only for you, but also for your heirs. So if you think about it, you're now potentially bloating your tax bracket by a sizable amount because we're really shortening the window in which you have to take money out. And the other kicker that you have to think about is when 2026 comes. So that is the date when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act will sunset and presumably will now have higher tax rates. Once again, we can't say for sure. There's a lot of time between now and then, but not only are we increasing the amount of taxable income, but you may be doing so at a much higher tax rate. So this is something to really pay attention to and to really have a long-term plan when you're looking from a tax perspective at your wealth and how you're going to distribute it. So I have here a graph of all the national average for US income taxes, the highest tax brackets over the years. So we went all the way back to 1933, I believe, here on this chart, to today's highest marginal tax rates. And you can see that historically speaking, they've been a heck of a lot higher than they are today. And you can see in the 1950s, 1960s, we were hovering around almost 85, 90%. They dipped a bit to almost 60% plus in the 1970s, 1980s. Over the 2010s, we were hovering around 35 and 40% at the highest marginal tax bracket rate. And currently, our highest marginal tax bracket rate is 37%. Now, when rates sunset in 2026, that automatically is written as it will bump back up to 39.6%. And depending upon what tax bracket you're in, you may be paying more tax based on the level of taxable income you have now. So this is something to really pay attention to. And all things being equal, now's a pretty good time from a tax perspective, historically speaking, to be realizing some taxable income, especially if you're in a low tax bracket. All right, so with this slide, I give a little nod to the Red Hot Chili Peppers with the title of this slide here, but essentially this bill had everything to do with Roths, right? So that's the opposite of an IRA, a 401a, 403b, where you put money in pre-tax. The money grows tax deferred. And then when you take the money out, when you retire, then you'll be taxed on the proceeds. So Roth is literally the inverse of that. You pay the taxes now, you get them out of the way, so that proceeds can then grow tax deferred. And then when you take the money out, if you've set it upright, it's now tax-free. So what they did was they allowed no required minimum distributions for folks that had a Roth component in their 403B and 457. So let me explain what that means. Typically, if you had a Roth piece or component in your 403B 457, when you retired and you took distributions out, the owner would be subject to required minimum distributions over their lifetime. Well, most folks may not know this, but with Roth IRAs, the owner during their lifetime is not subject to required minimum distributions. So one of the main reasons from a planning perspective, when I worked with a lot of clients there in higher ed and here in New Jersey, one of the things we would recommend is, hey, it would make sense to roll over your Roth 403B to a Roth IRA so that you don't have to deal with these required minimum distributions. And that was a pretty good reason. Well, now starting in 2024, they're going to do away with that. So that's a nice little perk for those that have Roth pieces in their 403Bs and 457s. But keep in mind, there is still reasons to consider a Roth IRA, namely being with different clocks. Typically, when you set up a Roth IRA, you have only one 5-year window or one 5-year clock to deal with, depending upon if you're younger than 59 and a half or older than 59 and a half. So for all your money of a Roth IRA to be tax-free, you have to do this 5-year window or 5-year clock. You have to have a contribution in for 5 years. If you're over 59 and a half, then you can take out your earnings tax-free. So with the Roth component in the 403Bs and 457s, you may have Roths in different accounts and have different windows you have to meet, different clocks. So it can get very confusing. And also keep in mind, when you take a distribution from your Roth piece in your 403B or your 457, they have to take it proportionately from your investments. Why is that a bad thing? Well, if you're invested in stocks and international, small companies, bonds, when you take $1, you have to literally take a piece from each of those pieces. And what if all the pieces are down in value? Well, that's a bad thing. So if you have a Roth IRA, you can be more strategic in how you take your money, potentially allowing it to last longer. You can actually segment, hey, international is down this year. I don't want to take any money from international. In my Roth IRA, I have natural commodities, which is up for the year. So I'm going to take my distributions from that. So that's another big reason to still consider a Roth IRA. Now, we also have some required Roth catch-up contributions. So this is new, and I'm going to see there has to be some literature and verbiage on this released by the New Jersey Division of Pension and Benefits. But as far as this law is written, in 2024, if your wages from the university, W-2, are over $145,000 in 2023, the year prior, you have to have your catch-up contributions go into a Roth component in your 403B and 457. So what does this mean? So for those who are over age 50, you can contribute $22,500 into your 403B or 457 plan. And if you want to do any additional amounts, you can do an additional $7,500 per year in a catch-up contribution. That no longer, according to this stipulation, can go to the pre-tax account. It's going to have to go to the Roth account. So what does that mean? In theory, if you're doing a catch-up contribution in the 403B, as well as the 457, $15,000 is going to have to be reported as income to you. So that may be income that you didn't realize. So that's important to figure out, especially for those who are maxing their 403B and 457 who make over $145,000 in wages from the university. So this doesn't apply to the self-employed. Most folks at the university are salaried. And then also there's the potential for employers to actually match contributions in Roth, not pre-tax. So it's effective immediately. I don't know how quick this will be rolled out. I'm sure this will be a very slow rollout, but this rule wouldn't apply if you're subject to a vesting schedule. Now in New Jersey, for example, Rutgers University, for an example, you have a 1-year vesting schedule. So what that means is the 8% Rutgers contributes to your retirement account in that 401A becomes yours once you've been there for a year. But once again, it remains to be seen how this is going to play out in New Jersey, but it's something to be aware of, that there may be some employer contribution eligibility from a Roth perspective, if that's something you'd like to do. And another big thing that got a lot of the headlines is now for those folks who open a 529 plan, those college savings plans for their children or their grandchildren, for those that don't end up going to higher education or using the monies for private school, for that money that's sitting there, that $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 that never got used, well, those folks can now transfer that under certain criteria to a Roth IRA. So it's a nice way of still keeping the proceeds, but getting a nice investment benefit out of it. So it's effective starting 2024. It's a direct transfer from the 529 to the Roth IRA. However, there's a lot of different hoops and criteria you have to meet. So the 529 plan has to be open for at least 15 years to even qualify for this. And any contributions in their earnings from the 5 years prior do not qualify. So this is another big thing that may hurt the amount of money that could be used to transfer into this Roth. And then finally, it must be in the name of the beneficiary. So the Roth IRA is going to be designated in that child's name, and they must have earned income, because in order for you to contribute to a Roth IRA or any IRA, one of the rules is you have to have earned income, because that's what you need to make a contribution. So if they don't have earned income, they can't just do this 529 transfer to their Roth IRA. Additionally, if you change the beneficiary and say, hey, my son's not gonna be eligible for this, but I'm gonna change it to my daughter, well, guess what happens? The clock for the 15-year rule here gets reset. So there's a lot of different things you have to jump through, and there's only a lifetime transfer of $35,000 total. So not a lot of people will qualify for this, but for the rare and specific circumstances where somebody has $10, $20, $30, $40,000 in a 529 plan that will never get used, this may be a nice little benefit for them. Another interesting provision of the Secure Act 2.0 is now we have special catch-up provisions, specifically for those who become age 60, 61, 62, and 63. I have no idea why they picked those ages. Maybe they felt a lot of folks were going to retire at 65. I know in academia, and maybe closer to age 70. Nevertheless, they picked those ages, and they said they may be able to contribute an extra $10,000 for their special catch-up contribution, or an amount equal to 150% of that dollar amount. When you do the math, it's basically, I think it's another $11,250 instead of $10,000, whichever dollar amount is in effect for 2024. So it's a little bit confusing language here, but that's something to look forward to in 2025 if you're still working and you hit those ages. Now, as far as qualified charitable distributions go, for those of you who don't know what that is, only IRA owners can make a qualified charitable distribution. That's why it is bold here. If you have a 401A, 403B, you cannot even do this. So for those who are charitably inclined, you can actually satisfy your required minimum distribution up to $100,000 per person. And instead of taking that required minimum distribution, you can actually, if you want to direct it directly to a charity of your choosing, nonprofit that qualifies as a 501c3 organization, that will satisfy your required minimum distribution and come off of your gross income. So you get a nice tax break. You get to lower your taxable income, presumably by up to $100,000 for the year. Go to the charity of your choice. It can be a really nice benefit for some people and really help their planning. So now that will be indexed for inflation. So 100,000 will keep growing over the years, starting in 2024. And they gave a special $50,000 QCD, qualified charitable distribution, for those that want to go to a split interest trust. So split interest trust is a charitable remainder unit trust, a GRAT, a charitable remainder annuity trust. I think I just said that twice. But that's a very specific and rare situation. And there's a lot of stipulations about it. It's got to be owned by a husband and wife. And if you do this special $50,000 QCD to a split interest trust, it has to always be funded by a QCD going forward. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for probably 95% of the population, but it's there. And finally, there used to be some big penalties on not taking your required minimum distribution. It used to be 50% of the amount you were supposed to withdraw. That would be your penalty. So this was a very large penalty, very onerous, and they wanted to give folks a little bit of a reprieve. And now the penalty is reduced to 25%. It's not as onerous. And even in some instances, if you get it in time in a certain correction window, it can drop down to even 10%. So these are some things that are quite beneficial for those investors, those in academia that are looking to maximize their savings and their retirement contributions. So moving along, let's talk a little bit about things to think about this year. What are some opportunities? So I have a quote here: "Cash is no longer king." And that is a direct quote from me. So judging by what cash is paying now in a checking account, I have here 23% APY is the national average for savings accounts nationally as of last week on 1/25. So that is paltry. That is not a lot of interest. That is 23% of 1%. So for those folks that are looking to redeploy their cash, get it working harder, I have here the Treasury bill rate. So this is considered the tax-free rate with a Treasury bill. And I believe this is for a 3-month. So when we say risk-free rate, it's guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the US government. And essentially on an annualized basis, the rates last week on 1/25 for a 3-month Treasury bill were 4.25%. So that's pretty darn good. That's annualized. So if you did a 3-month Treasury bill, and once again, you can purchase these on treasurydirect.gov, is you would get 4.25% times 9 divided by 12. And that would be your rate of interest. So let's call it 1.1% and change for those 3 months. Now you could look at a 1-year Treasury, you can go higher, but this is a nice place to reconsider redeploying your cash. I do not work for Capital One. I'm going to give them a little bit of a plug here. But if you look at their high yield savings account, I believe, I think it's like a 360 account. I forget what it's called, but it was north of 3.30% or right around there. So you can also look at Goldman Sachs with their Marcus accounts. There's many that are out there that are online that you can get a higher yield savings account. That might be a nice place to look at if you're not sure, because right now there's a large opportunity cost with inflation of not getting that money moving and just letting it sit. And that's especially true for those that already have an ample emergency account. They really need to pay attention to this. And finally, what are some other money moves that professors should be thinking about now that the year is here? We had such a crazy year in the stock market and the bond market last year. What should you be doing? How do you get prepared to retirement and really focus on what you need to look at? So the first thing you should definitely do is revisit your retirement projection. A lot of things have changed. Just looking at the start of last year where interest rates were to now, it's been a humongous change. So the expected returns for stocks and bonds moving forward has drastically changed. And you need to take those assumptions and work it into your plan. Because the assumptions, if you were going off a backwards looking perspective, that may be a little bit favorable, because if we look at the last 25 years worth of data, the stock market did really well as a whole, and the bond markets did pretty well also. So moving forward after this crazy year that we've had, a lot of the assumptions have changed in planning, and you need to account for that. And also, it may make sense. I know inflation is coming down, but you may want to run some scenarios before you retire if we have a higher than normal inflation regime. So historically, inflation might have averaged, let's call it 3%. But for the next 3, 4, 5 years, if the Fed cannot get inflation tamed to its 2% target, you need to be able to stress test your portfolio and your retirement income to see if it still looks favorable over the long term. And another thing you should be thinking about is, of course, taxes. That's one of the themes of tonight. Just in talking about the required minimum distribution rules for the Secure Act. Also, you should be thinking about, for those professors that I work with that have money in their TIAA accounts in what's called the RA contract. That's the retirement account contract. That's the pre-1995 balances somebody may have. So a professor who I've been working with for, let's call it 30, 40 years, may have a very large sum in their RA contract. So if you look at your TIAA accounts and you have 5, 6, 7 different accounts, this is the one that you probably started with and maybe have a big account balance. So in that account, there may be an after-tax portion. You might have actually contributed some monies after tax. Well, some of the things that I've been doing with clients is you can actually reposition just the contributions, and you have the opportunity to move them directly to a Roth IRA. So I did that with a professor last year, and we were able to move, I think it was $13,000 or $15,000. He was in the highest tax bracket, so that was a savings of, let's say, $4,200 back in his pocket. So that's a place to check out on your TIAA statement from a tax planning perspective. Also, in the years before your required minimum distributions start and after your retirement, these are prime opportunities to revisit your tax brackets. And it may make sense to not wait until you reach age 73 or you reach age 75 until required minimum distributions start kicking in. Why? Because you may be in a lower tax bracket. And if we can accelerate some income now out of that, the end result will be you may perhaps be paying lower lifetime taxes, and you'll be lowering your required minimum distribution amount in the long run. So that's another thing you should be paying attention to. And finally, if you're charitably inclined, maybe a qualified charitable distribution may make sense. It may make sense to bunch your deductions. There's a lot of different strategies we can look at. And finally, don't get complacent. There are too many folks that I work with that have $2, $3, $4 million at TIAA, and they think everything's great. And yes, that is a large account balance. You're doing well, but all it does is it takes one mistake to mess that up, one bad health event, etc. And mismanagement can really lower that amount. And you really have to look at your amount after taxes, especially if you've been contributing pre-tax for the last 30, 40 years. So for somebody that has, let's say, $3 million after tax, you're maybe talking, if you're in the highest tax brackets, 2.2, 2.3, maybe even less. So that you really have to have a strategic plan on how to manage that money, and also take the steps needed because you're what we call the fragile risk zone. All that means is the 5 years before you retire and the 5 years after you retire, it's critically important that you have a set plan, because market fluctuations can really throw it off very quickly. So this is something you have to pay attention to. And as I'm alluding to now, it's way easier to get up the hill than it is to get down the hill. There's a lot of different risks, sequence of return risks, inflations, the markets. The game is on when you're retired. And one mistake can lead to a permanent pay decrease in your retirement paycheck. So this is a very critical stage. Do not wait till the 6 months before you retire to go to the university and say, hey, I'm ready to talk retirement now. You're probably getting too late at that point. So definitely plan now, do not wait. All right, I went a little bit over here, and I think now would be a good time for some questions. So if you want to type any of the questions in the Q&A box. We will answer them. All right, so question here, can I convert my inherited IRA into a Roth IRA? You cannot do that. That is off limits. However, you can convert a traditional IRA into a Roth IRA. There's typically no limitations on doing that, but no, you cannot convert a inherited IRA into a Roth IRA. Another question here, will my beneficiaries have to take out required minimum distributions over 10 years as well? Good question. It really depends upon if you have to take, there's this whole thing in Secure Act 1.0, if you're an eligible designated beneficiary. So for those folks that qualify as an EDB or eligible designated beneficiary, those are your spouse, minors. So it can't be your grandchildren. It has to be, you know, if you were age 80 and you had a child and they were 12 years old, that would qualify. Very rare to do, but so it would be minors, chronically ill or disabled folks, and those who are not more than 10 years younger than the person who passed away. So for example, you die at age 85, it would have to be a friend at that point. And for those that inherited money prior to 2020, those are the folks that would be able to stretch out their inheritance over their lifetime, over their life expectancy. And if you don't meet that definition of those 5 or 6 qualifications of an eligible designated beneficiary, well, then you would, generally speaking, have to take it out over 10 years. So it's really tough to tell. I would need some more information, but generally speaking, if you leave it to your child and they're not an eligible designated beneficiary, yes, they would have to take it out over the 10-year rule. But the nice thing about that is they may be able to wait till year 10 and they can let that Roth marinate, if you will, and compound and grow. And it won't be all that bad because the proceeds come out tax-free. But it's much better than having a IRA being left and you have to take all that money out over 10 years. And once again, we're still getting some clarification on the rules, and it would I'd have to know a little bit more specifics about when you would die. If you took it before your required beginning date or after your required beginning date, it would change things. But other than that, generally speaking, yes, your child would have to most likely take it out over 10 years, but once again, it would be tax-free and you'd be able to let that grow, so it wouldn't be all that bad. All right, I don't see any more here in the queue. So with that being said, I hope you learned a little bit more about the Secure Act 2.0. I know it's a lot to go over. There's actually so many provisions. I think there was over like 300 plus. We narrowed it down to the main focal points here, between pushing it back the RMD ages, between having opportunities to contribute more money to your retirement accounts, more Roth opportunities for sure. I mean, it was Roth crazy, but all in all, it was a good thing and can really open up some opportunities to preserve and maximize your wealth moving forward. And if you'd like to see any more education around higher education with professors, administrators, if you're a part of the university, you can visit my YouTube channel, University Retirement Planning. I'll probably have a replay of this video and some other education that might be helpful. And please check out my firm, Atlas Fiduciary Financial, and their YouTube channel, It's Your Smarter Money, for those of you that are really into the technicalities of investments and financial planning. It'll be a nice resource for you as well. So once again, hope you enjoyed tonight's session. Hope you learned a little bit about Secure 2.0. If you have questions, shoot me an email, give me a call. I'd be happy to help. And other than that, I hope you have an enjoyable evening and I will see you soon. Take care. Have a great night.